1984 Ohio, the Resch family, the case that scientists documented, and the media exposed to the world. The autumn leaves of 1984 were just beginning to turn golden in the quiet suburban neighborhoods of Columbus, Ohio, when something impossible began happening at 1424 Blue Ash Drive. What started as minor household annoyances in the Resch family home would soon become one of the most thoroughly documented poltergeist cases in modern history, witnessed by police officers, firefighters, news crews, and paranormal investigators from around the world. The house itself appeared utterly ordinary from the outside, a modest two-story brick home built in the 1950s, with a well-maintained front lawn and white picket fence that spoke of American suburban normalcy. Inside, however, the walls had begun to witness events that would challenge everything rational minds believed about the nature of reality itself. Joan and Joan Resch had been foster parents for over a decade, opening their hearts and home to children who needed stability and love. Their household was organized chaos in the best possible way, filled with the laughter, arguments, and daily rhythms of a large, blended family. By the fall of 1984, they were caring for several foster children, including 14-year-old Tina Resch, a girl whose troubled past had led her to their doorstep 2 years earlier. Tina had arrived as a damaged 12-year-old, carrying the emotional scars of abandonment and neglect. The Resches had worked patiently to help her heal, providing the consistent care she had never known. She was finally beginning to flourish. Her grades were improving, she had made friends at school, and for the first time in her young life, she seemed to have found a place where she belonged. But on the morning of September 4, 1984, everything changed. Joan Resch was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the first crash. A ceramic lamp had somehow fallen from the living room end table, shattering across the hardwood floor. As she bent to clean up the pieces, wondering how it could have fallen on such a still morning, another crash echoed from upstairs. Then another. And another. Within minutes, objects throughout the house began moving on their own, not just falling but flying through the air with purposeful trajectories. Pictures launched themselves from walls, glasses slid across countertops and shattered, and furniture began shifting positions when no one was near it. The impossible had invaded the ordinary world of 1424 Blue Ash Drive, and nothing would ever be the same again. What made the Resch case extraordinary wasn't just the intensity of the phenomena, but the fact that it would unfold under the scrutinizing eyes of the media, scientists, and skeptics. Within days, news crews would be camped outside their door, capturing footage that would be broadcast around the world. Paranormal investigators would set up sophisticated monitoring equipment, and researchers from respected institutions would arrive to document every inexplicable event. The family who had dedicated themselves to healing broken children was about to discover that some fractures run deeper than anyone could imagine, and that some wounds might open doorways to forces beyond human understanding. Joan and Joan Resch had never intended to become extraordinary. When they first opened their modest Columbus home to foster children in the early 1970s, they simply wanted to help kids who had nowhere else to go. What began as a calling to serve became the defining purpose of their lives, transforming their two-story brick house into a sanctuary for the forgotten and abandoned. John worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local manufacturing plant, his steady paycheck providing the financial foundation that allowed the family to take in children others might consider difficult cases. His gentle demeanor and infinite patience made him a natural father figure to kids who had learned not to trust adults. Joan, a homemaker with an enormous heart, possessed that rare ability to see potential in even the most troubled children. She had a gift for making every child feel wanted, no matter how many homes they had been rejected from before. By 1984, the Resch household had become a revolving door of healing. Over the years, they had fostered dozens of children, some staying for weeks, others for years. Some moved on to successful adoptions, while others aged out of the system but stayed in touch, considering Joan and John the closest thing to real parents they had ever known. The house constantly buzzed with activity. Homework sessions at the kitchen table, birthday parties for kids who had never had them before, and family dinners where everyone was expected to share their day. The other foster children living there in 1984 included 10-year-old Craig, who had been with the family for 8 months after being removed from an abusive situation, and 16-year-old Lisa, who was preparing to age out of foster care and had been living with the Resches for nearly 3 years. There was also 12-year-old Mark, a recent arrival who was still adjusting to the household's rhythms and rules. But it was Tina Resch who had become the heart of the family. Tina Resch had arrived at their doorstep in October of 1982, a frightened 12-year-old with haunted eyes and a tendency to flinch whenever adults moved too quickly around her. Her case file painted a heartbreaking picture. Born to a teenage mother who couldn't care for her, passed between relatives who saw her as a burden, and eventually surrendered to the foster care system when she was 8 years old. Before coming to the Resches, she had lived in 4 different foster homes, each placement ending in disruption due to what social workers diplomatically called behavioral issues. The reality was that Tina had learned to protect herself the only way she knew how, by pushing people away before they could abandon her. She arrived angry, defensive, and convinced that the Resches would eventually give up on her too. Her first weeks in the house were marked by tantrums, stolen food hidden under her bed, and fierce resistance to every attempt at affection or guidance. But Joan and John had seen it all before. They recognized the behavior for what it truly was, a wounded child testing whether this family would really keep her. They responded with consistent love, clear boundaries, and endless patience. When Tina screamed that she hated them, they calmly told her they loved her anyway. When she broke household rules, they imposed consequences while reassuring her that breaking rules didn't mean breaking their family. Slowly, miraculously, Tina began to heal. By the summer of 1984, she had transformed into a typical 14-year-old girl. She had best friends at school, participated in the drama club, and spent hours on the phone gossiping about boys and teachers. Her grades had improved dramatically. She was pulling B's and C's instead of the failing marks that had characterized her earlier school years. She had developed a particular bond with Joan, often helping with dinner preparation while chattering about her day. Tina had also grown close to her foster siblings, especially Lisa, who had become like an older sister to her. The 2 girls shared clothes, secrets, and dreams about their futures. For the first time in her life, Tina was planning beyond next week. She talked about learning to drive, going to prom, maybe even college. The Resches had begun the preliminary paperwork to adopt her, a process that thrilled Tina even as it terrified her. After years of impermanence, the idea of belonging somewhere forever felt almost too good to be true. The daily routine at 1424 Blue Ash Drive had settled into comfortable predictability by September of 1984. Mornings began with Joan's cheerful voice calling everyone to breakfast, usually pancakes or eggs served with fresh orange juice and coffee for the adults. John would review his work schedule while the kids gathered their school supplies, backpacks, and weekend homework. The older children helped get the younger ones ready, creating a natural hierarchy of care that made everyone feel needed and valued. Evenings were family time. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock sharp, with everyone expected at the table regardless of homework, television shows, or social plans. Joan insisted that they go around the table sharing the best and worst parts of their day, a tradition that had initially embarrassed the teenagers but had become a cherished ritual. After dinner, homework was completed at the kitchen table under Joan's watchful eye, while John helped with particularly challenging math or science problems. Weekends were for family activities, trips to the local park, movie nights with homemade popcorn, and household chores that somehow became competitive games when John was in charge. The house was filled with the normal sounds of family life, laughter echoing from the living room, music drifting down from bedrooms, and the constant hum of conversation. It was, by every measure, a happy home. The kind of place where broken children learned to trust again, where second chances became new beginnings, and where love proved stronger than even the deepest wounds. Joan often said that fostering had taught her that there were no throwaway children, only children who hadn't yet found the right family to help them bloom. But beneath the surface of this loving, chaotic household, something was stirring. Tina, despite her remarkable progress, still carried scars that ran deeper than anyone realized. The trauma of her early years had left marks that went beyond behavioral issues or emotional problems. Some wounds, it seemed, created vulnerabilities that conventional healing could not touch. As September 4, 1984 dawned bright and clear, the Resch family had no idea that their ordinary Tuesday morning would shatter their peaceful world forever. The breakfast dishes were washed, the children were ready for school, and Joan was mentally planning her day, grocery shopping, laundry, and preparation for Tina's upcoming 15th birthday party. None of them suspected that their home was about to become the epicenter of events that would challenge everything they believed about reality, family, and the hidden powers that might lie dormant within a traumatized child's mind. The morning of September 4, 1984 began like any other Tuesday in the Resch household. Joan was in the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, preparing breakfast for the family before the children left for school. The familiar sounds of a house waking up filled the air, water running in the upstairs bathroom, footsteps on the creaking floorboards, and the muffled voices of teenagers negotiating bathroom time. Tina was the first to come downstairs, her long brown hair still messy from sleep, wearing her favorite jeans and a Columbus High School t-shirt. She mumbled a sleepy good morning to Joan and settled at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice, exactly as she had done hundreds of mornings before. There was nothing unusual about her demeanor, nothing that suggested this day would be different from any other. At 7:15, as the family was finishing breakfast and preparing to leave for work and school, the first incident occurred. Joan was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing the breakfast dishes, when she heard a loud crash from the living room. She rushed in to find the ceramic table lamp, a wedding gift from John's mother, shattered in pieces across the hardwood floor. The lamp had been sitting securely on the end table beside the couch, at least 4 feet from where anyone had been walking. What happened? Joan called out, assuming one of the children had accidentally knocked it over while gathering their school bags. But all 4 children were still in the kitchen, and John was upstairs getting dressed for work. No one had been in the living room. The family gathered around the broken lamp, puzzled but not yet alarmed. Houses settle, things fall sometimes. There had to be a logical explanation. Tina bent down to help Joan pick up the larger pieces. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said automatically, even though she clearly hadn't been near the lamp. It was a response born from years of being blamed for things that went wrong regardless of her actual involvement. "It's not your fault, honey," Joan reassured her. "These things happen." But even as she spoke the words, Joan felt a strange unease. The lamp had been sitting on that table for over 3 years without ever falling. There had been no vibration, no earthquake, nothing that could explain its sudden crash to the floor. 20 minutes later, as the children were grabbing their backpacks to leave for school, a second crash echoed from upstairs. John's voice boomed down the stairwell. "What the hell?" The family rushed upstairs to find John standing in the hallway, staring at a framed family photograph that lay on the floor, its glass spiderwebbed with cracks. The picture had been hanging securely on the wall for over 2 years, a formal portrait of the family taken the previous Christmas. "The nail's still in the wall," John said, pointing up at the picture hook that remained firmly embedded in the plaster. "The wire didn't break either. It's like the picture just lifted itself off the hook." Lisa, the 16-year-old, laughed nervously. "Maybe we have a ghost," she joked, but her voice held an uncertain edge. The children left for school, chattering about the strange morning incidents, but Joan and John remained troubled. 2 items falling within 30 minutes seemed like more than coincidence, especially when neither had an obvious cause. At 10:30 that morning, with John at work and Joan alone in the house doing laundry, the phenomena escalated dramatically. Joan was in the basement, loading clothes into the washing machine, when she heard what sounded like multiple objects crashing simultaneously throughout the house above her. The sounds were coming from different rooms: the kitchen, the living room, possibly the dining room as well. Her first thought was that someone had broken into the house. She grabbed a baseball bat that John kept near the basement stairs and cautiously made her way up to the main floor. What she found defied all logic. In the kitchen, every cabinet door stood wide open. Plates, glasses, and bowls were scattered across the countertops and floor, some broken, others somehow intact despite having clearly fallen from considerable heights. The refrigerator door hung open, its contents partially spilled across the linoleum. In the living room, books had been pulled from their shelves and lay scattered across the carpet. Couch cushions were on the floor, and every picture remaining on the walls hung crooked. But what terrified Joan most was the silence. The burglars had done this, where were they? The house felt empty except for her own presence, yet the destruction suggested a violent struggle had just taken place. With shaking hands, she called the police. Officer Mike Weber arrived at 11:15, a 23-year veteran of the Columbus Police Department who had seen his share of domestic disturbances and break-ins. But as he walked through the Resch house, taking notes and photographs, he found himself increasingly puzzled. "Mrs. Resch," he said, setting down his camera in the kitchen, "I've got to ask, are you sure no one else was in the house when this happened?" "Positive," Joan replied. "I was in the basement the whole time. I would have heard someone come in." Officer Weber examined the doors and windows. All were locked from the inside with no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be stolen. The television, stereo equipment, and Joan's jewelry box were all untouched. It looked less like a burglary and more like someone had gone through the house in a rage, destroying things seemingly at random. "Has your family been having any domestic issues?" Weber asked delicately. "Sometimes when there's stress at home, kids act out in destructive ways." Joan shook her head. "Officer, my children were all at school when this happened. I can give you the phone numbers to verify that. And even if they had been here, how could they have done all this in the few minutes I was downstairs?" Weber had to admit she had a point. The destruction was too extensive to have been accomplished quickly by even the most energetic teenager. As the officer was finishing his report, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, a coffee mug sitting on the kitchen counter suddenly slid across the surface and crashed to the floor. Both Joan and Officer Weber watched it happen. The mug had been sitting motionless on the counter at least 3 feet away from either of them. There was no vibration, no apparent cause for movement. It simply began sliding as if pushed by an invisible hand, accelerated across the smooth counter surface, and fell to the floor where it shattered into pieces. Officer Weber stared at the broken mug, then at Joan, then back at the counter. In 23 years of police work, he had never seen anything like it. "Mrs. Resch," he said slowly, "I'm going to recommend you call your insurance company about this damage. But I'm also going to suggest, maybe you should consider having your house checked for structural problems. Sometimes settling foundations can cause strange things to happen." It was a reasonable suggestion, but even as Weber said it, he knew it didn't explain what he had just witnessed. Houses didn't make coffee mugs slide across counters with purposeful motion. When the children returned from school that afternoon, they found their mother sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking shaken and exhausted. The house had been partially cleaned up, but evidence of the morning's chaos remained visible. "Mom, what happened?" Tina asked, dropping her backpack and rushing to Joan's side. As Joan explained the events of the day, she noticed something peculiar. While all the children seemed shocked and concerned, it was Tina who appeared most affected. The 14-year-old grew increasingly pale as the story unfolded, and by the time Joan finished describing the moving coffee mug, Tina was visibly trembling. "Are you okay, honey?" Joan asked, putting an arm around the girl. I don't feel good," Tina whispered. "Can I go lie down?" That evening, as the family tried to return to their normal routine, more incidents occurred. During dinner, a salt shaker slid across the table while everyone was watching. A picture fell off the dining room wall as they were clearing the dishes. When they gathered in the living room to watch television, the channel changed repeatedly on its own, despite the remote control sitting untouched on the coffee table. Each incident was witnessed by multiple family members. Each defied easy explanation. And increasingly, everyone began to notice a pattern. The phenomena seemed strongest when Tina was in the room. John called in sick to work the next day, determined to figure out what was happening in his house. He spent the morning inspecting the electrical systems, checking for gas leaks, and examining the foundation for any structural issues that might cause vibrations or instability. He found nothing abnormal. At 10:45 on September 5th, while John was examining the living room walls for cracks, a candlestick flew off the mantelpiece and struck the opposite wall. John spun around, looking for any possible cause, a hidden string, a mechanical device, anything that could explain the object's trajectory. He found nothing. The candlestick had traveled approximately 12 feet in a perfect arc, with enough force to dent the plaster wall where it struck. The trajectory was too precise to be accidental, too forceful to be caused by falling. That afternoon, John called his brother-in-law, Mike Shannon, a skeptical engineer who prided himself on logical thinking and scientific explanations. Mike arrived at the house that evening, convinced he would quickly identify the cause of these supposedly supernatural events. He didn't have to wait long. At 8:22, as Mike was examining the living room where many incidents had occurred, a heavy glass ashtray lifted off the coffee table and flew across the room, missing his head by inches. Mike dove for cover, then immediately began searching for hidden wires, mechanical devices, or any apparatus that could have propelled the ashtray. He found nothing. "This is impossible," Mike muttered, examining the ashtray where it had landed. "Physics doesn't work this way." But impossible or not, the events were escalating. By the end of the first week, the Resch family had documented over 40 separate incidents of objects moving, flying, or breaking without apparent cause. Joan had started keeping a detailed log, noting the time, location, witnesses, and nature of each event. The pattern was becoming undeniable. The phenomena occurred most frequently when Tina was present, often seemed to intensify when she was upset or stressed, and appeared to focus on objects within a 20-foot radius of wherever she happened to be sitting or standing. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Tina herself seemed to be growing weaker with each passing day. She complained of headaches, had trouble sleeping, and appeared to be losing weight despite Joan's efforts to ensure she was eating properly. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and she became increasingly withdrawn and anxious. Whatever was happening in the Resch house, it was taking a toll on everyone, but especially on the frightened 14-year-old girl who seemed to be at the center of it all. By September 10th, news of the strange events had spread beyond the immediate family. Joan's sister had told her neighbors, John's co-workers were asking questions, and several teachers at Columbus High School had noticed Tina's distressed state and declining academic performance. Word was spreading through the community that something very strange was happening at 1424 Blue Ash Drive. And soon, people would start coming to see for themselves, beginning with representatives of the local news media, who had heard rumors of a house where objects moved by themselves. The Resch family was about to discover that having witnesses to impossible events was both a blessing and a curse. Their private nightmare was about to become very public indeed. The phone call that changed everything came at 7:38 on the morning of September 11th, just 1 week after the phenomena had begun. Joan answered to find a reporter from WTVN News on the line, asking if she would be willing to discuss the unusual events that neighbors claimed were happening at her residence. "How did you find out about this?" Joan asked, her stomach sinking with dread. "We received several tips from people in your neighborhood," the reporter explained. "They say objects are flying around your house by themselves. We'd like to send a camera crew out to document what's happening." Joan's first instinct was to hang up. The last thing her family needed was media attention turning their private crisis into a public spectacle. But as she glanced around her kitchen, where 3 more glasses had shattered during breakfast that morning, she realized they desperately needed help understanding what was happening to them. I need to talk to my husband," she said finally. The WTVN News crew arrived at 2:15 that afternoon, led by reporter Fred Shannon, a veteran journalist known for his no-nonsense approach to strange stories. Shannon had covered everything from UFO sightings to faith healers during his 20-year career, and he approached the Resch case with healthy skepticism and professional curiosity. What he witnessed that day would fundamentally change his perspective on the nature of reality. The crew was setting up their equipment in the living room when the first incident occurred at 2:47. A ceramic vase sitting on the mantelpiece suddenly launched itself across the room, traveling in a perfect arc before shattering against the far wall. The trajectory was captured on film from 2 different angles, and Shannon immediately examined the area for any possible mechanical explanation. "There's nothing here," he told his cameraman Bob Warden. "No wires, no springs, no hidden devices. That vase just flew by itself." Over the next 3 hours, the news crew documented 8 separate incidents of objects moving without apparent cause. Books flew off shelves, pictures crashed to the floor, and a heavy wooden chair in the dining room slid 6 feet across the floor while everyone was watching. Each event was captured on film, with multiple witnesses present to verify what had occurred. But it was the final incident of the day that truly stunned the professionals who had come to investigate. At 5:53, as the crew was preparing to leave, a large mirror hanging in the hallway suddenly cracked in a spiderweb pattern while Tina was walking past it. The crack spread across the surface in real time, creating an intricate web of fractures that seemed to follow no natural pattern. The mirror remained hanging on the wall, but its surface was completely destroyed. Shannon examined the mirror closely, noting that the cracks appeared to have originated from the center and spread outward in a deliberate pattern. There was no impact point, no sign of trauma that would explain the sudden fracturing. "In 30 years of journalism," Shannon told his viewers that evening, "I have never seen anything like what happened in the Resch house today. We have filmed documentation of objects moving without any apparent cause, witnessed by multiple trained observers. I cannot explain what we saw, but I can verify that it happened." The WTVN report aired on the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news that night, making the Resch family instantly famous throughout central Ohio. By the following morning, their phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, curiosity seekers, paranormal investigators, and skeptics demanding proof of the extraordinary claims. Dr. William Roll, a respected parapsychologist from the Psychical Research Foundation in Durham, North Carolina, saw the news report and immediately called the family. Roll had spent over 2 decades investigating cases of spontaneous psychokinesis, commonly known as poltergeist activity, and the Resch case exhibited all the classic characteristics of what he termed recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. "Mrs. Resch," he explained during their phone conversation on September 13th, "what you're experiencing appears to be a form of psychokinetic phenomena often associated with adolescents under emotional stress. I'd like to come to Columbus with a team of researchers to document and study what's happening." Joan was torn between relief at finding someone who believed them and terror at the implications of his words. "You're saying this is real? That we're not going crazy?" "You're not going crazy," Roll assured her. "This is a documented phenomenon, though it's extremely rare. Would you allow my team to set up monitoring equipment in your home?" Roll arrived in Columbus on September 15 with Dr. Jeannie Lagel, a clinical psychologist, and Stephen Bauman, a technician specializing in electromagnetic monitoring equipment. They brought sophisticated instruments designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies, temperature fluctuations, and vibrations that might explain the phenomena. What they found exceeded their expectations for documented paranormal activity. Over the first 48 hours of their investigation, Roll's team recorded 63 separate incidents of objects moving without apparent cause. The monitoring equipment detected electromagnetic spikes preceding many of the events, temperature drops of 10 to 15 degrees in specific areas of the house, and vibrations that seemed to emanate from no identifiable source. But most significantly, their careful observations confirmed what the family had suspected. The phenomena were directly correlated with Tina's presence and emotional state. The incidents cluster around the subject, Roll noted in his research journal. Maximum activity occurs within a 6-meter radius of Tina's position. Activity increases during periods of stress, anxiety, or emotional upset. The subject appears to be unconsciously directing psychokinetic energy that manifests as telekinetic events. Dr. Lagel conducted extensive psychological evaluations of Tina, finding her to be a normal 14-year-old girl dealing with significant emotional trauma from her early childhood. The psychological testing revealed above-average intelligence, artistic talent, and deep-seated feelings of abandonment and powerlessness stemming from her years in the foster care system. Tina exhibits classic markers for RSPK agents, Lagel explained to the family. Adolescent females with histories of trauma or instability often serve as focal points for psychokinetic phenomena. The unconscious mind appears to be expressing psychological stress through physical manifestations. But understanding the potential cause didn't make the phenomena any less terrifying or destructive. On September 18, the activity escalated to dangerous levels. During breakfast, a heavy cast-iron skillet flew across the kitchen, missing Joan's head by inches before embedding itself in the drywall. The impact was so forceful that it required 2 men to pull the skillet free from the wall. That afternoon, while Roll's team was conducting measurements in the living room, a large bookshelf suddenly toppled over, sending dozens of books flying in all directions. Tina was sitting approximately 8 feet away when it happened, reading quietly on the couch. The bookshelf hadn't been bumped or touched. It simply fell forward as if pushed by invisible hands. The incident was particularly disturbing because Craig, the 10-year-old foster child, had been playing on the floor nearby. He escaped injury only because John happened to be standing close enough to pull him out of the way at the last second. "This is getting too dangerous," John told Joan that evening. "Someone's going to get seriously hurt." The phenomena weren't limited to the house anymore either. When Tina attended school on September 19th, her first day back since the investigation began, incidents occurred in her classroom. A chalkboard eraser flew across the room during algebra class, and several students' pencils broke simultaneously during English. The school principal called Joan within 2 hours, requesting that Tina be kept home until the situation could be resolved. Fire Captain Fred Parker and his crew were called to the house on September 20th when smoke alarms began going off throughout the building despite no detectable fire or smoke. When they arrived, they witnessed one of the most dramatic incidents yet recorded. As Captain Parker was examining the smoke detectors in the upstairs hallway, a picture frame suddenly flew off the wall and struck him in the shoulder. The impact was forceful enough to bruise his arm through his heavy uniform jacket. Parker immediately called for backup and began searching the house for anyone who might have thrown the object. "I've been a firefighter for 18 years, Parker later told reporters. "I know the difference between accident and assault. That picture frame was thrown with deliberate force, but there was nobody there to throw it. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I experienced." The fire department's official report documented unexplained phenomena of unknown origin and recommended that the family consult with appropriate specialists. As news of the official report spread, the media attention intensified dramatically. Reporters from national networks began arriving in Columbus, setting up camp outside 1424 Blue Ash Drive. NBC, CBS, and ABC all sent crews to document the phenomena, and the story was featured on national news broadcasts. The constant media presence added enormous stress to an already impossible situation. Tina, who had always been shy and uncomfortable with attention, found herself the unwilling center of a media circus. Reporters shouted questions at her whenever she appeared outside, photographers tried to capture pictures through the windows, and curiosity seekers drove slowly past the house at all hours. The stress appeared to fuel the phenomena rather than diminish them. During a live television broadcast on September 22nd, reporter Mike Jackson was interviewing Joan in the living room when a lamp suddenly flew off a side table and shattered against the wall behind him. The incident was broadcast live to viewers across the Midwest, making the Resch case one of the first poltergeist phenomena ever captured on live television. Dr. Roll's measurements during this period showed the highest levels of electromagnetic activity yet recorded. Temperature fluctuations became more extreme, with some areas of the house dropping to near freezing levels while others remained normal. The phenomena were occurring with increasing frequency, sometimes every few minutes during Tina's waking hours. But perhaps most disturbing was the toll the activity was taking on Tina herself. She had lost over 15 pounds since the phenomena began, despite Joan's efforts to ensure she was eating properly. Dark circles under her eyes gave her a haunted appearance, and she complained constantly of severe headaches that seemed resistant to any pain medication. "I feel like something's inside me," Tina told Dr. Lagel during one of their sessions. "Like there's this energy that wants to get out, but I can't control it. Sometimes I feel it building up and I know something's going to happen, but I can't stop it." The psychological evaluation revealed that Tina was not consciously causing the phenomena. Brain wave monitoring during active events showed patterns consistent with deep unconscious activity rather than deliberate mental effort. Whatever was happening appeared to be completely beyond her conscious control. On September 25th, the situation reached a crisis point when a large kitchen knife flew across the room during dinner, embedding itself in the wall just inches from where Lisa was sitting. The blade penetrated the drywall so deeply that John needed pliers to remove it. "That's it," John announced after examining the knife. "This has gone too far. We can't keep living like this. Someone's going to get killed." Roll agreed that the situation had become too dangerous to continue indefinitely. The phenomena were intensifying rather than diminishing, and the family was approaching complete emotional and physical exhaustion. "We need to consider intervention options," he told Joan and John that evening. "This level of psychokinetic activity is extremely rare and potentially dangerous. We may need to explore treatments that address both the psychological and parapsychological aspects of what's happening." But even as they discussed potential solutions, the phenomena continued to escalate. That night, as the family tried to sleep, objects throughout the house continued to move and crash. The sound of breaking glass and falling furniture kept everyone awake, and by morning the house looked like a war zone. After 3 weeks of documented activity, the Resch family faced a terrible decision: find a way to stop the phenomena permanently, or abandon their home entirely. The question was whether whatever force was manifesting through Tina could be contained, controlled, or eliminated, or whether it would follow them wherever they went. The answers would determine not only the family's future, but potentially their survival. By the end of September 1984, the Resch family had reached their breaking point. 3 weeks of constant paranormal activity had left them exhausted, terrified, and desperate for any solution that might restore peace to their home. The house at 1424 Blue Ash Drive had become unlivable, with broken objects covering every surface and the constant threat of flying debris making normal activities dangerous. Joan's sister Margaret suggested they contact Father Dennis Kavanaugh at St. Christopher's Catholic Church, where the family occasionally attended services. Despite his initial skepticism about supernatural explanations, Father Kavanaugh agreed to visit the house after hearing detailed accounts from multiple credible witnesses. The priest arrived on the morning of September 27th, carrying a leather satchel containing holy water, blessed oils, and a wooden crucifix that had belonged to his grandfather. He was a practical man in his early 50s, more comfortable discussing social justice than spiritual warfare, but the desperation in Joan's voice had convinced him to investigate the situation personally. Father Kavanaugh had barely entered the living room when a picture frame flew off the mantelpiece and shattered at his feet. The priest stared at the broken glass, then looked around the room for any possible explanation. Finding none, he opened his satchel and began preparing for what he privately hoped would be a simple house blessing. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," he began, sprinkling holy water throughout the living room. As the droplets hit the walls and furniture, the temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably, and an oppressive feeling settled over everyone present. Tina, who had been sitting quietly on the couch, suddenly doubled over as if in pain. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "It feels like something's fighting inside me." Father Kavanaugh knelt beside the distressed teenager, placing his hand gently on her forehead. The moment his skin made contact with hers, every picture remaining on the walls crashed to the floor simultaneously. Books flew off their shelves, and the heavy wooden coffee table slid across the room with enough force to gouge the hardwood floor. "Blessed Mother of God," the priest whispered, pulling his hand back in shock. The phenomena continued for nearly 10 minutes, with objects moving throughout the house while Father Kavanaugh attempted to complete the blessing. When the activity finally subsided, the priest was visibly shaken but determined to help the family. "What you're experiencing goes beyond anything in my training," he admitted to Joan and John. "But I know someone who might be able to help. Father Martinez at the diocesan office has experience with unusual cases." Father Roberto Martinez arrived the following day, accompanied by 2 senior clergy members and a theologian from the Columbus Catholic Seminary. Martinez had participated in 3 official exorcisms during his 25-year career and had studied accounts of supernatural phenomena throughout church history. After interviewing the family extensively and reviewing Dr. Roll's documentation, Father Martinez concluded that the situation exhibited characteristics of both genuine psychokinetic phenomena and possible demonic influence. "The Church recognizes that some individuals possess abilities that science cannot yet explain," he told the assembled family. "However, we also believe that such abilities can sometimes attract malevolent spiritual forces. We should proceed with both psychological counseling and spiritual intervention." The formal blessing ceremony took place on October 2nd, with all family members present except Tina, who had been experiencing severe headaches and was resting upstairs. Father Martinez began with traditional prayers, moving methodically through each room of the house while sprinkling holy water and burning blessed incense. When he reached Tina's bedroom, the phenomena erupted with unprecedented violence. The moment Father Martinez entered the room, Tina's bed began shaking violently, as if gripped by an invisible earthquake. The wooden headboard slammed repeatedly against the wall, creating deep gouges in the plaster. Books, clothes, and personal items flew through the air in chaotic patterns, and the temperature dropped so dramatically that everyone's breath became visible. Tina herself appeared to be in the grip of some kind of seizure, her body convulsing while she spoke in a voice that sounded nothing like her normal tone. The words were unintelligible, but the hatred and malice behind them were unmistakable. "Get out!" she screamed, though her eyes remained closed and she appeared to be unconscious. "You have no power here." Father Martinez began reciting the prayers of exorcism, his voice growing stronger as the phenomena intensified around him. The other clergy members joined in, their combined voices creating a powerful chorus of Latin prayers that seemed to push back against whatever force was manifesting in the room. The confrontation lasted nearly 2 hours. Windows cracked, furniture overturned, and deep scratches appeared in the walls as if made by invisible claws. But gradually, as the prayers continued, the violence began to subside. The temperature slowly returned to normal, objects stopped moving, and Tina's convulsions ceased. When it was over, Tina appeared to be sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and her breathing was deep and regular. Father Martinez pronounced the blessing complete and expressed cautious optimism that the spiritual intervention had been successful. For 48 hours, it seemed as though the exorcism had worked. The house remained quiet, with no incidents of moving objects or unexplained phenomena. Tina's appetite returned, her headaches disappeared, and she began talking about returning to school. But on October 5th, the phenomena resumed with renewed intensity. Dr. Roll, who had been monitoring the situation throughout the religious interventions, noted that the electromagnetic readings were higher than ever before. Whatever force was responsible for the phenomena appeared to have been strengthened rather than weakened by the spiritual confrontation. It's possible that the exorcism succeeded in removing any external spiritual influences, he explained to the family. But the psychokinetic abilities themselves appear to be an inherent part of Tina's neurological makeup. We may need to explore medical and psychological treatments rather than spiritual ones. Dr. Sarah Chin, a neurologist from Ohio State University Medical Center, agreed to examine Tina after reviewing Dr. Roll's documentation. Chin specialized in unusual brain activity and had studied several cases of individuals claiming psychokinetic abilities. The medical examination revealed several interesting anomalies. EEG readings showed unusual brain wave patterns, particularly in the temporal lobe region associated with emotional processing and memory formation. MRI scans revealed slightly enlarged amygdala structures, which could explain Tina's heightened emotional responses and stress sensitivity. The brain patterns are consistent with individuals who've experienced significant early childhood trauma, Dr. Chin explained to Joan and John. However, there are also some unusual electromagnetic signatures that I've never seen before. It's possible that the traumatic experiences somehow altered her neurological development in ways that manifest as psychokinetic phenomena. Dr. Chin recommended a combination of anti-anxiety medication and intensive psychotherapy to address both the underlying trauma and the stress that seemed to trigger the phenomena. She also suggested temporarily removing Tina from the family environment to see if the phenomena were truly connected to her presence. Joan's sister Margaret offered to have Tina stay at her house in nearby Westerville for a trial period. On October 8th, Tina moved in with her aunt's family, bringing only a few personal belongings and a desperate hope that the nightmare might finally end. The results were both encouraging and troubling. Within hours of Tina's departure, all phenomena at the Resch house ceased completely. No objects moved, no unexplained sounds occurred, and the electromagnetic readings returned to normal levels. The house felt peaceful for the first time in over a month. However, Margaret called Joan the very next morning with disturbing news. "Joan, you need to come get Tina right away," Margaret said, her voice tight with fear. "Last night, every picture in my house fell off the walls. This morning, the kitchen cabinets were all standing open, and there's broken dishes everywhere. Whatever's happening to her, it followed her here." The phenomena at Margaret's house were less intense than those at the Resch home, but they were undeniably present. Over the 3 days Tina stayed there, Margaret's family witnessed 18 separate incidents of objects moving without apparent cause. Dr. Roll's testing confirmed that the psychokinetic field appeared to be centered on Tina herself rather than any particular location. Wherever she went, the phenomena followed, though they seemed strongest in environments where she felt emotionally connected or stressed. On October 11th, Tina returned to 1424 Blue Ash Drive, and the phenomena immediately resumed at their previous intensity. Dr. Lagel increased the frequency of Tina's therapy sessions, focusing on trauma resolution and stress management techniques. She taught Tina meditation exercises, breathing techniques, and cognitive behavioral strategies for managing anxiety and emotional overwhelm. The goal is to help Tina develop conscious control over her emotional states, Dr. Lagel explained to the family. If the phenomena are triggered by unconscious stress responses, learning to manage those responses might reduce or eliminate the psychokinetic events. The therapy sessions showed promising results. On days when Tina reported feeling calm and in control, the phenomena were noticeably reduced. During particularly successful therapy sessions, entire afternoons would pass without incident. But the improvement was inconsistent and fragile. Any stress, a difficult homework assignment, an argument with one of her foster siblings, or even too much media attention, would trigger renewed activity. The family also tried practical solutions. They removed all breakable objects from common areas, secured furniture to walls, and established safe zones, where family members could retreat during active episodes. John installed security cameras throughout the house, both to document the phenomena and to ensure that no one was accidentally injured by flying objects. By November, a pattern had emerged. The phenomena occurred in cycles, with periods of intense activity followed by days or even weeks of relative calm. During the quiet periods, Tina seemed like a normal teenager, attending school, socializing with friends, and participating in family activities. But everyone lived in constant fear that the next outbreak was just around the corner. Dr. Roll continued his research, collaborating with international colleagues who had studied similar cases. He found parallels with other documented RSPK cases, particularly those involving adolescent females from unstable backgrounds. Most such cases eventually resolved themselves as the subjects matured and developed better emotional regulation skills. "There's reason for hope," he told Joan and John during a November consultation. In 70% of documented cases, psychokinetic phenomena fade significantly by the subject's 18th birthday. The neurological changes that occur during late adolescence often eliminate or greatly reduce these abilities. But 18 seemed impossibly far away to a family living with daily chaos and destruction. Religious counseling continued as well, with Father Martinez providing regular spiritual guidance and prayer sessions. While the formal exorcism hadn't eliminated the phenomena, the ongoing spiritual support seemed to provide comfort and stability for both Tina and the family. Local support groups for families dealing with unusual circumstances provided additional emotional assistance. Joan connected with other foster mothers who had experience with traumatized children, finding strength in shared experiences and practical advice. By December 1984, the family had developed coping strategies that made daily life marginally more manageable. The phenomena continued, but their impact was somewhat reduced through careful planning, environmental modifications, and ongoing therapeutic intervention. However, the question remained whether these temporary solutions would be sufficient to sustain the family through the potentially years-long process of waiting for Tina to outgrow her psychokinetic abilities. The Resch family had learned to live with the impossible, but they had yet to find a way to truly overcome it. Their search for lasting solutions would continue, driven by love for Tina and determination to preserve their family despite the extraordinary circumstances that threatened to tear them apart. As winter gave way to spring in 1985, the Resch family began to notice subtle but encouraging changes in the frequency and intensity of the paranormal phenomena. What had once been daily occurrences gradually became weekly events, and the violent outbursts that had characterized the peak months slowly diminished to minor incidents. A glass sliding across a table, a book falling from a shelf, a picture frame tilting without apparent cause. Dr. Roll documented this decline meticulously, noting that the electromagnetic readings were decreasing consistently over time. His theory that the phenomena would naturally fade as Tina matured appeared to be proving correct, though the process was slower than anyone had hoped. Tina is learning to manage her emotional responses more effectively, Dr. Lago reported during a family consultation in March 1985. The therapy sessions have helped her develop coping mechanisms for stress and anxiety. As she gains conscious control over her psychological state, the unconscious psychokinetic manifestations are becoming less frequent and less intense. Indeed, Tina herself seemed to be developing an intuitive understanding of the connection between her emotional state and the phenomena. She learned to recognize the physical sensations that preceded incidents, a tingling in her hands, a feeling of pressure in her head, or a sudden spike in anxiety, and began using the relaxation techniques Dr. Lago had taught her to diffuse the building energy. "I can feel it starting sometimes," Tina explained to her foster parents. "It's like this buzzing feeling that builds up inside me. But now I can do the breathing exercises or go somewhere quiet until it passes." By her 16th birthday in October 1985, the incidents had become rare enough that Tina was able to return to school full-time and begin participating in normal teenage activities. She joined the school drama club, made close friendships with several classmates, and even began dating a boy named David Chin, whose family had recently moved to Columbus from California. David's presence seemed to have a particularly calming effect on Tina. The young man was patient, understanding, and remarkably unfazed by the occasional minor incident that still occurred around her. His acceptance and normalcy provided Tina with the emotional stability she had craved throughout her tumultuous adolescence. The Resch family was finally able to complete Tina's adoption proceedings in January 1986, making official what had always been true in their hearts: she was truly their daughter. The legal ceremony was small and private, but it represented a triumph over the chaos that had nearly destroyed their family. Joan often reflected on how the traumatic experience had ultimately strengthened their bonds. "We learned that love really can conquer anything," she told reporters during a follow-up interview in 1987. "Even when we didn't understand what was happening, we never stopped loving Tina or believing that we could find a way through it together." Dr. Roll continued monitoring the case through Tina's 18th birthday, documenting a complete cessation of psychokinetic phenomena by March 1988. His final report on the Resch case became one of the most comprehensive studies of RSPK ever completed, contributing significantly to the scientific understanding of psychokinetic phenomena. The Resch case demonstrates several key characteristics of authentic psychokinetic events, Roll concluded in his published research. The phenomena exhibited consistent patterns, were witnessed by multiple credible observers, occurred under controlled conditions, and followed the typical developmental trajectory seen in other documented cases. Most importantly, the events could not be replicated through any known methods of fraud or mechanical manipulation. The case attracted international attention from the parapsychological research community. Scientists from the University of Edinburgh, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and the Society for Psychical Research in London all studied Roll's documentation and concluded that the Resch case represented compelling evidence for the existence of genuine psychokinetic abilities. However, skeptics continue to argue that the phenomena could be explained through a combination of fraud, suggestion, and misperception. James Randi, the famous magician and debunker of paranormal claims, maintained that all reported incidents could have been produced through clever trickery, despite his inability to demonstrate how such extensive deception could have been maintained over such a long period with so many witnesses. The controversy surrounding the case was intensified by a revelation that emerged in 1988, when a photographer claimed to have captured Tina deliberately throwing an object while pretending it had moved by itself. However, this single photograph was contradicted by hundreds of witnessed events that occurred when Tina was clearly not in a position to manipulate objects manually. Dr. Roll and other researchers noted that even if some incidents involved conscious fraud, which they neither confirmed nor denied, the vast majority of documented events occurred under conditions that made deception impossible. The presence of multiple witnesses, video documentation, and scientific monitoring equipment provided overwhelming evidence that genuine psychokinetic phenomena had occurred. Tina herself addressed the fraud allegations directly during a television interview in 1989. "I know some people think I was faking everything," she said, "but I lived through it every day for over a year. I felt the energy building up inside me. I experienced the headaches and exhaustion that came with the phenomena. You can't fake that kind of physical and emotional toll. I wouldn't have put my family through that nightmare if I could have controlled it." As Tina entered adulthood, she made a conscious decision to live as normal a life as possible. She enrolled at Ohio State University, studying elementary education with the goal of becoming a teacher. Her choice of career seemed particularly meaningful given her own experiences as a troubled child who had been helped by caring adults. She married David Chin in June 1991, in a small ceremony attended by the Resch family and close friends. The couple settled in suburban Columbus, where Tina began teaching third grade at Riverside Elementary School. Her colleagues knew nothing of her extraordinary past, and she preferred to keep it that way. "I want to be known for who I am now, not for what happened when I was a teenager," she explained to Joan during a family dinner in 1993. "Those experiences shaped me, but they don't define me." Tina and David had 2 children, Sarah in 1994 and Michael in 1997. Neither child ever exhibited any unusual abilities, and the family lived a blissfully normal suburban life. Tina proved to be an excellent teacher, beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues for her patience, creativity, and intuitive understanding of children who were struggling with emotional or behavioral issues. Joan and John continued fostering children throughout the 1990s, eventually caring for over 80 children during their 3-decade career as foster parents. They often drew on lessons learned during the crisis with Tina, particularly the importance of unconditional love and professional support when dealing with severely traumatized children. "The experience taught us that some children carry wounds that go deeper than we can imagine," John reflected during his retirement speech from the foster care system in 2001. "But it also taught us that healing is possible, even in the most impossible circumstances." Dr. Roll remained in contact with the family for the rest of his career, occasionally checking in to verify that the phenomena had not returned. His continued research into psychokinetic cases was heavily influenced by the insights gained from studying the Resch family, and he often cited their case as the most convincing evidence he had encountered for genuine paranormal abilities. The house at 1424 Blue Ash Drive became something of a landmark in the paranormal research community. Numerous investigators visited over the years, hoping to detect residual energy or continued activity. However, no subsequent phenomena were ever documented at the location, supporting the theory that the psychokinetic events were specifically linked to Tina's presence and psychological state. The Resch case has been featured in dozens of books, documentaries, and academic papers over the decades since it occurred. It remains one of the most thoroughly documented and credibly witnessed cases of alleged psychokinetic phenomena in modern history. Yet questions persist that may never be answered satisfactorily. What exactly caused a traumatized 14-year-old girl to seemingly develop the ability to move objects with her mind? Was it a natural human ability triggered by extreme stress, or something more mysterious? Could the phenomena have been controlled or directed if better understood? And most intriguingly, how many other individuals might possess similar abilities that remain unrecognized or undeveloped? Dr. Lagel, who continued studying trauma-related psychological phenomena throughout her career, theorized that extreme childhood stress might sometimes trigger dormant neurological capabilities that normally remain inactive. The human brain uses only a small percentage of its potential capacity, she noted in a 2005 research paper. It's possible that severe trauma occasionally unlocks abilities that we don't yet understand. Other researchers have suggested that psychokinetic phenomena might represent a form of quantum consciousness interaction with physical matter, operating through mechanisms that current science cannot explain. The Resch case provides compelling evidence that such interactions are possible, even if the underlying physics remain mysterious. Today, Tina Chin lives quietly in Columbus with her family, working as a special education coordinator for the city school district. She rarely discusses her teenage experiences publicly, preferring to focus on helping other troubled children find stability and success. Those who know her describe her as compassionate, insightful, and remarkably resilient. In a rare interview conducted for the 30th anniversary of the phenomena in 2014, Tina reflected on how the experience had ultimately shaped her life in positive ways. "It was terrifying while it was happening," she acknowledged, "but it also taught me that human beings are capable of far more than we usually imagine. I learned that love really can overcome impossible circumstances, that families can survive anything if they stick together, and that sometimes the things that seem like curses can become sources of strength." Joan Resch, now in her 80s, continues to speak occasionally at conferences for foster families and social workers. She often tells the story of Tina's case as an example of how unconditional love and professional support can help children overcome even the most extraordinary challenges. "People sometimes ask me if I would do it all over again, knowing what we would go through," Joan said during a recent interview. "The answer is absolutely yes. Tina is our daughter, and she's become an amazing woman who helps other children every day. Whatever we endured was worth it to see her thrive." The scientific community remains divided on the implications of the Resch case. Believers point to the extensive documentation, multiple witnesses, and careful monitoring as proof that psychokinetic phenomena are real and deserve serious scientific study. Skeptics continue to argue that even the most carefully documented cases can be explained through a combination of fraud, suggestion, and experimental error. What cannot be disputed is that the Resch family experienced something extraordinary that changed their lives forever. Whether those events represent genuine paranormal phenomena or something else entirely, they provide compelling evidence that our understanding of human consciousness and its relationship to the physical world remains profoundly incomplete. The house at 1424 Blue Ash Drive still stands today, home to a different family who report no unusual activity. But for those who lived through the events of 1984 and 85, it will always be remembered as the place where the impossible became reality, where a troubled teenager's unconscious mind apparently reached out and touched the physical world in ways that science cannot yet explain. The mystery of what really happened to the Resch family may never be fully solved. But their story continues to inspire researchers, comfort other families facing extraordinary challenges, and remind us all that the boundaries between the possible and impossible may be far more fluid than we dare to imagine.